this splendid experience in 2015, especially to Giannakopoulou and of course to Semeli for having made the bridge between Mytilene, where I come from, and Amorgos. So I'm going to talk to you about terraces for agriculture in the Aegean. And this material comes from a lot of different studies we have carried out the last 15 years in the Aegean. And they deal mainly with the terraces and the islands of the East Aegean, that means the Dodecanese and Lesbos and Samos. And fortunately, we do not have much experience with the terraces of the main Aegean, of the Cyclades, but I hope the time is ticking for that. So, I'm going to talk about the geographical and historical aspects of terraces a little bit. Everything is a little bit. No time for more. About the values of terraces, I'm going to say a little bit about a case study of Nishiros, the island we have worked most, and then a little bit of the future perspective of terraces. I don't know whether it exists, but it is us if they are going to have a future or not. So what is terraces? Terraces are horizontal man-made spaces created to permit or to facilitate cultivation on sloping terrain, especially on hills and on mountains. Mostly, and almost always, they are supported by dry stone walls, what we call xerolithies. But there are also cases where these terraces are supported by natural vegetation, and there are reasons for that. So, hamadophytes, bushes, they can keep the terraces in place for many years, as well as dry stone walls do. Terraces are an element, a landscape element that it is the most recyclable since the antiquity in the Aegean. Many people have passed, many people have used and reused the material, the stone material and the terraces, and because of that, we believe that it is a diachronic palimpsest of human actions and labor, and this is also why it is very difficult to be found by archaeological excavations. So archaeological evidence is mostly lost, although the last few years there are many studies that have found many evidences about terraces in the Aegean. Terraces are related to subsistence economy. So people had to work in order to live from the product of their labor. So in all islands, although in each island we believe that it is their own saying, they say spiti oso thoris and horafi oso thoris, that is, house as small as you can fit in and land as much as far as you can stare. And I think this is the first time that the Greek saying is shorter than in English, which is particular, and because it is very true. So, why terraces? Because in the Aegean, the environmental conditions were, in the old times, were very harsh. There was, the residences that were mainly on highlands because of security reasons, because of health reasons, and there, the slope area had to be somehow managed in order to be more productive. The soil was stony, little, infertile, dry, it could not keep the rain, and entirely the island, all the islands of the Aegean were very inaccessible. For this reason, they need to get independent for food, the people, therefore they had to do something in order to live from the land they had. They had to transform the slopes. Sometimes this transformation was up to the utmost of the hill, which is it's incredible for today to see how people could work at those times. Three types of terraces exist. There are many more, combinations of these, but the basic types are step terraces, as you can see over there, braided terraces, as you can see here, and pocket terraces that you can see. So here they are which is mostly related to tree cultivation. So terraces have existed since the antiquity, although as ephemeral structures, they were difficult to be evidenced by archaeological excavations because it is very difficult to keep them in time. There are also, however, there are evidences that terraces existed in many islands, and we have proof for that. On the island of Vilos, on Kea, on Kythnos, Psyra, a small island in Mirabellu Gulf, was totally terraced since 4th century before 4th millennium before Christ, and of course they were not only used for cultivation, but also in order to make towns on that. And we know very well that Pergamos, yes, thank you, Kos, Arkesia in Carpathos were built on terraces. So, in order to address the issue of the absence of flat surface and soil, what they did, they terraced the slopes by leveling steep slopes and formed flat surfaces in order to cultivate. They created cultivable soil by smashing the rocks on the spot, but also carrying soil from elsewhere, sometimes themselves, sometimes on pack animals. They also redistributed, when smashing the rocks, they redistributed the soil on the spot, because sometimes, especially on limestone, this soil tends to be gathered within pockets, so it is mostly infertile, the whole area is mostly infertile, and only very small pieces of land, of soil are fertile. Therefore, they had to do every now and then redistribute the whole area with the soil they brought or they created on the spot. All this, of course, resulted in holding the soil on place and prevent the erosion, which was the most important thing of the whole procedure. In order to address the issue of stony and infertile soil, they had to take away all the stones from the very stony place, so they had to use them somehow. What they did, they used them in making the walls, but also sometimes the stones, there were so many, so they had to put them all together somehow, very well managed in order not to keep that much space. So they created this Hermakes or Armakes, a word that comes from Hermes in the ancient times, and the Hermeses that they were put inside the road in order to mark the road, the sign the road. So they smashed also the road, the rock, in order to create, as I said, soil, but also at the same time, this resulted in an easiness for the water to percolate through the soil and the roots to penetrate into the soil, so to make the whole thing more workable. What also they did was a very important management tip, which is something that in the whole Aegean has been kept until 50 years ago. They used to keep a land fallow for 1 or more years, depending on the fertility of the soil, and to rotate crops every 2 or 3 years, if that was possible, because in some areas this was not possible, in order to make the fertility come back. The water shortage, of course, through terracing is enhanced. and the aquifers get much more water, so the whole area becomes much more fertile. So there are also further advantages from the terracing, and this is first the diversification of microclimates on the place by conditioning differentially sun radiation, wind, and humidity. So in the whole structure you have different climates, and in the old times the agriculturists knew where to make this type of crop, the other type of crop, and live their families. Terraces also help limiting the flooding effects through reducing violent post-rain torrential events. They facilitate also access to the highest part of the field, as you can see here on the island of in the east. And of course they have more oximi. And of course they have more advantages by giving possibilities to structures that facilitate the living and facilitate the processing of the crops. For example, people made dwellings for themselves and for their animals, and they have different names in different islands: Spilabia, Damakia, Damia, Katikes. They made also peristeriones, dog coats on them. Sometimes, and many times actually, something for the spirit, which were the churches, and also something to be used in order to process the food stuff that was produced on the spot, like wine and olive presses, as you can see here. This comes from the island of Castellorizo, and it is both used in the antiquity, or not in the antiquity, in early medieval times. It has been used for both wine making and olive oil making. Also distilleries sometimes in the island of Mykonos, for instance.